board will see some flexibilities proposed in the regulatory section of the meeting today. So in the teaching and learning section, to allow school districts flexibility as they need to plan to possibly move between in-person and remote learning, or a combination of the two. The new guidelines have built in several flexible features to ensure our schools have the options they need to best support all students. The department is making available flexible student-staff ratio requirements in pre-kindergarten if class sizes are smaller to comply with the lower ratios of the Office of Children and Family Services and New York City's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene guidelines. The department is allowing extended time for pre-kindergarten and kindergarten screening to be completed for students who come to our schools after the December 1st normal deadline. A waiver is available allowing districts to convert their UPK seats from full day to half day. Districts and schools UPK funding will not be penalized if they convert more than 30% of their seats from full day back to half day. This is not applicable to the statewide universal full day pre-K programs, however. One of the key features of these guidelines focuses on the flexibility for our schools with regard to the 180 minutes per week unit of study requirement. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, schools must plan for various contingencies that may make it impossible for a specified amount of face-to-face contact between teachers and students. Hours of instructional time cannot be defined as a student's time spent in front of a teacher or in front of a screen, but rather in time engaged in standards-based learning under the guidance and direction of a teacher. Students are entitled to instruction that will allow them to attain the learning standards in the subject areas they are studying. The key question that schools must consider when developing or adopting new modalities of instruction is, are the instructional experiences, when taken as a whole, comparable in rigor, scope, and magnitude to a traditionally delivered 180-minute per week unit of study? We know that PE activities benefit students' physical health, but research also indicates that regular physical activity improves students' mental health as well as contributes to academic success. School reopening plans should ensure that whether in-person, remote, or hybrid models are utilized, students should be participating in physical activity under the direction of a physical education teacher. Understanding that hybrid and remote schedules may limit face-to-face class time with a certified physical education instructor, such instructors should plan to the best of their ability a menu of learning activities for their students to engage in under the direction of their classroom teachers, other staffs, or even independently. Some additional flexibilities in the teaching and learning section of the guidance allow an allowance for a blend of hands-on or virtual science laboratory experiences that will meet the laboratory requirements for a Regents science course. And when appropriate, districts may also utilize remote or virtual work-based learning experiences to meet the requirements for work-based learning in their CTE and CDOS programs.
Good morning, this is Shannon Logan. For technology and connectivity, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the inequitable access to technology and internet services in students' places of residence was a priority to be addressed. The closure of New York schools and subsequent shift to remote learning only put a brighter spotlight on this urgent need. As we heard from many participants in the Regents Reopening Task Force, sufficient access to a computing device and high-speed broadband is essential for educational equity. It is imperative that districts and schools have an accurate understanding of the state of digital equity for students and teachers. And regardless of whether districts and schools operate in in-person, remote, or blended models, districts and schools should, to the extent practicable, address this need to provide students and teachers for use in their places of residence with a computing device and consistent, reliable access to high-speed internet. It is also important that when developing continuity of learning plans, districts and schools ensure that there are multiple ways for students to participate in learning and demonstrate mastery of learning standards in remote or blended models, especially if all students do not yet have sufficient access to devices and high-speed internet. Next slide. Thank you. In addition, it was made clear during the reopening task force meetings that in addition to ensuring digital equity, more work needs to be done to ensure all students and teachers have the technology knowledge and skills necessary for success in digital learning environments. Districts and schools should consider how they can provide both instruction on technology use and IT support for students, teachers, and families, as well as professional development for teachers and school leaders on designing effective online or remote learning experiences and best practices for instruction in online or remote settings.
Good morning, everybody. For special education and for students with disabilities, reopening plans must provide a framework that supports the implementation of individualized education programs, as well as the provision of a free, appropriate public education. To support districts and programs in developing their plans to reopen, the department has identified 5 mandatory special education requirements that must be incorporated into reopening plans. District and program plans will include information that identifies how a free, appropriate public education consistent with the applicable health and safety requirements will be provided to students, how meaningful communication and engagement with parents will occur, how coordination will be implemented with all service providers such as districts, BOCES, charter schools, approved private schools serving preschool and school-age students with disabilities, and how that coordination will occur. The 5th mandatory requirement is how instructional and technological supports will be provided to promote student success. Next slide, please. Thank you. Additionally, district and program plans should consider the following for students with disabilities. So in combination with the mandatory requirements, there are some priority considerations. We need to be prioritizing high-need students and preschool students with disabilities to receive in-person services, and there should be the development of contingency plans for special education to be delivered remotely during intermittent or extended school building closures. All of these requirements and considerations will ensure reopening plans include a framework for the delivery of special education and related services that are designed to meet the needs of students with disabilities and provide continuity of their ongoing preparation for further education, employment, and independent living. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Elisa Alvarez for Bilingual Education and World Languages. The reopening of plans will need to address the learning loss experienced by many of our English language learners and multilingual learners in both their English language development and their mastery of content area knowledge. The department has identified the following requirements and considerations that will allow the schools to provide services that address the impact of last year's school closures and prepare them for the potential challenges for the upcoming school year. Some of the mandatory requirements are to be followed by districts and schools for the reopening in-person, remote, or hybrid instruction include the following. Provide all communication for parent and guardians of ELs in their preferred language and mode of communication to ensure that they have equitable access to critical information about their child's learning. Ensure that all English language learners receive the appropriate instruction that support their college, career, and civic readiness by providing the required instructional units of study in their ENL or bilingual education program based on their most recent English language proficiency as measured in their last NICES LAT exam. Conduct the L identification for all students who enrolled during COVID-19 school closures and or during this summer, 2020, and during the first 20 days of the school year for 2021. And therefore, within 30 days of the start of the school year, pending regulatory approval. In recognition that all teachers are teachers of ELs, it is essential that school districts and schools provide professional learning opportunities related to the instruction and support of our students to all educators throughout New York State as required by Commissioner's Regulations Part 154. Thank you. The consideration and best practices for remote, in-person, or hybrid instruction include the following. Develop policies and procedures that follow the guiding principles of the Blueprint for English Language Learner, Multilingual Learner Success. Promote collaboration in a consistent manner among all content area teachers and specialists in ENL or bilingual education, to including a schedule of regular or consistent meetings to plan instructional lessons and provide modifications that best support the academic and linguistic needs of our students. Engage in a multi-tier system of support to provide academic as well as social emotional well-being and behavioral development to support our English language learners and multilingual learners in their home language as necessary. Continue the use of technology, including online learning and other digital tools, not only to address the needs of our students, but also to help build on their knowledge, as well as helping them become digital learners. Ensure that all students with interrupted, inconsistent formal education receive the support that they are entitled to receive, and extend these services for our SIFE students who were impacted by the COVID-19 school closures of 2019-2020 beyond the required 12-month SIFE identification period. Pre-kindergarten programs should follow the emergent multilingual learner profile and should continue to implement best practices to leverage these students' home language in their instruction. Continue to provide the ability for all qualified students to earn the New York State Seal of Biliteracy, including those students who graduated in June 2020, but were unable to complete the seal due to COVID-19 related closures. And now, Alex Tricalinos.
Thank you, Elisa. So the work that teachers, school leaders, and other education professionals do is a significant factor in supporting student learning, and it matters now more than ever. During our task force meetings, we consistently heard that the COVID-19 pandemic is presenting unique challenges with respect to staffing schools as LEAs think about their reopening plans, whether we're in an in-person, remote, or hybrid instructional model. It's for this reason that although districts are still required to meet minimum statutory and regulatory requirements related to employing and evaluating their professional staff, we are hoping to create additional flexibilities for LEAs during this time.
Related to the requirement that LEAs employ teachers with valid and appropriate certificates for their assignments, there will be proposals presented later during this meeting on potential changes to incidental teaching and substitute teaching. The proposed changes to incidental teaching would extend the amount of time that certified teachers can teach a subject not covered by their certificate area from the current 5 classroom hours per week to 10 classroom hours per week during the 2020-2021 school year. The proposed changes to substitute teaching would allow substitute teachers who are not certified, are not working towards certification, and hold a high school diploma or its equivalent to be employed by a school district or BOCES beyond the 40-day limit during the 2020-2021 school year after a good faith recruitment search. We are also strongly encouraging LEAs to examine their existing protocols for accepting student teachers and to work collaboratively with educator preparation programs to determine the best ways that student teachers can support the success of the district's teachers during this challenging time.
So one final topic that's addressed in the reopening guidance and that we discussed during the task force meeting is the need for additional flexibility around teacher and principal evaluation requirements, so APPR. As you all know, although certain parts of the evaluation system in New York State are specifically required by statute, much of the requirement is left to the Board of Regents and the department to establish in regulation. It's for that reason that when the board voted on the permanent regulations for APPR in April, you put in place a process to allow districts to apply for a variance from regulatory requirements if there was an alternative approach to evaluation that the district wanted to take. So during this time, we are strongly encouraging school districts and BOCES to review their current evaluation plans in light of their plans for teaching and learning during the coming school year. And they should work with the department to amend those plans as needed to match their plans for teaching and learning. And if they do need flexibility, additional flexibility, we are going to be working with them to submit those variance proposals that would allow them to take alternative approaches to evaluation. So it's really our hope that all of these flexibilities around staffing will help to ensure that LEAs are successful during the coming school year.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Laura. Next slide. Just as our guidance and portal timeline, Wednesday, July 15th, we will be getting the guidance out to the field. By Friday, July 17th, the portal will open. And by Friday, July 31st, submission of the opening plans need to be put into the portal. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Harmon, who is Assistant Commissioner for Office of Accountability.
Thank you, Kim. So all districts, schools, and BOCES, including charter schools, must create comprehensive reopening plans at the school level. All of those plans must include required elements that are outlined in the guidance document. Districts and schools should post those plans to their public websites so that parents, students, and community stakeholders will have easy access to their local reopening plans. As Kim mentioned, on or before July 31st, the district superintendents or the CEOs will log in to the department's monitoring and vendor performance system, or the portal. As Kim mentioned earlier, this is the same platform that was used previously to collect continuity of learning plans and the plans that districts provided related to child nutrition and to child care. As part of that portal submission, each district, each entity, BOCES district, will provide links to those reopening plans for each of the schools within their organization. Each of those plans will include a series of assurances in the form of a yes/no statement that the district plan adheres to all of the requirements that are established in the reopening guidance. In addition, districts and schools will be asked to identify best practices that the school and/or district is incorporating into those individual plans. For schools or entities that do not have access to the portal, additional methods for submitted plans have been developed. More information on submitting plans will be sent directly to superintendents and school leaders after approval of the guidance documents by the Board of Regents.
And with that, I say thank you, and I turn it over to Chancellor Rosa.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you to all the hard work that has gone into developing this guidance. Three quick things. One, and then we're going to open it up so Vice Chancellor and people, the board members can ask specific questions, and then we'll move to the higher ed. But before we do, I just want to say, once again, you will see throughout the document your voices, the participation of the individuals on the task force, and specifically with the various buckets. These issues were analyzed, taken into account, and your voices mattered during this process. So we thank you for your wisdom, your time, and your commitment to doing this work from grassroots. The second thing is, I do want to say that we had, from the very beginning, requested that that the governor's Reimagine group and the governor focus on, obviously, health and safety, and we have had the opportunity to provide them with our section of the health and safety, and we are in the process of having, we've had a couple of meetings, creating the intersections, the interfacing of the information, which is why once that is completed, we will have the as Kim calls the big chunky document out to the field. A great deal of work has gone into this, but this again is a document that's evolving because of the unknown. The final piece that I just want to make sure everybody understands that we are looking at one document, and I do believe that the interfacing and the intersection will create an opportunity to have this information in one place, one guidance. It's important that you also pay attention to some of the glossary and some of the other components and links that are in this. And again, we are so grateful to everyone that has worked on this. We're grateful to the interim commissioner. We're grateful to Kim, who has really, truly led this work, and her staff in P12. They have worked around the clock. They have been, this has been 24/7 and plus. And for that, I am grateful. I'm grateful for the feedback that the regents have given to the document as well. They have been intimately involved in this process, and for that, I am extremely grateful. With that, I turn it to Vice Chancellor.
Thank you, Chancellor. And I want to underscore yet again the amount of work that went into this. I want to thank our staff. This is something that will be an extreme help to districts and schools. Once you see it, you will be impressed. It's an enormous amount of information, and it is not a book of mandates. It's a helpful tool. It's guidance. It allows for leeway and flexibility, as was demonstrated in the presentation that you just watched. And again, I think it will be of enormous benefit to schools and districts. We do have a number of questions, and I want to remind everyone, if your hand is raised, to unmute yourself so that I don't have to do it, and I don't think I can do it anymore. So I'm going to ask that you do that. I'm going to start with Regent Collins and Regent Young, followed by Regent Mead and Regent Wills. Again, if you would unmute yourself before you start to talk. Regent Collins?
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Wilkinson. Dr. Wilkinson, will all of the reopening plans be posted on not only the district's websites, but on the state ed website? And does this include charter schools as well?
Regent Collins, excuse me, no, they will not be posted onto our website. They will be on their own websites, but not to the state ed website, no.
Okay, so we would have to go to each one of the districts in order to see what their opening plans are. I'm thinking of, being a grandmother in one section of the city, of the state, I would love to see what's happening if my kid was in another district. So you can only find them by going to the district
yes.
or the charter school website.
Yes, ma'am, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Regent Young?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chancellor. And I would just like to echo everything that you and both the chancellors said, but I'd also like to make this point. You and the chancellor both have established an inclusive process as we go forward. And I think unlike lots of I would call statewide initiatives, this has been an opportunity to hear from a variety of stakeholders. And what I was most impressed with was the youth leadership forum that was conducted. And not only was that opportunity very informative, it is also significant to note that what the young people said was included in our guidance. And I would just underscore just generally that they highlighted the importance of having regular contact with their teachers. And I think that is very significant as we go forward. And we always have to remember that while we're in this remote environment, young people benefit and want an interaction, a regular interaction with some of the most significant adults in their lives, their teachers. So thank you. Thank you, staff, for everything that you do.
Thank you, Regent Young. Regent Mead?
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. So a question about will larger districts have greater flexibility school to school in terms of implementing their plans? I can see how smaller districts are more easily able to achieve some uniformity of their plan within the district itself. But some of the questions I'm getting from New York City are school specific. And so will those final determinations be made at the superintendent level, or will individual school leaders have flexibility within their buildings to make their own plans?
They're going to have to work with their school districts and not do individual per se. As at the local level, I know that sometimes they're looking at elementary in one structure, middle and high school, but that's really at the local level. So that will be at the district working in conjunction with their schools, because in the city it can be a lot different because they share buildings and whatnot. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Wells?
Yes, thank you. First, again, I'm very, very grateful for the work that's been done. I was so impressed reading the comments, the considerations, particularly the list of considerations of which present ideas that can really make transformational changes in schools. And there are a couple of questions I have. One of them, and goes back to something that Dr. Young mentioned, and that is regular contact with students. Is there a way for us to require that the continuing discussion of how instruction will be delivered include that regular, not just as a consideration, but demonstration that there will be regular contact, whether on a daily basis, if at all possible, to the greatest extent possible on a daily basis with students? Because I think when we talk about social emotional health, when we talk about the real meaning of learning, there has to be that connection. And the other thing I wanted to ask was, is there a possibility of looking at the 180 days and saying, well, right now we have 4 days for professional development built in. Could we have 6 days, because there's so much need for training teachers, giving teachers an opportunity to adjust themselves to these new environments, to adjust to the new remote learning possibilities, to expand those possibilities throughout the year, that there be times to take a pause so that we are ensuring that we're really connecting with parents in this and we're adjusting to parent needs. In other words, is there a way to have flexibility from 4 days to 6 days in counting the 180 days for professional development purposes?
Going back to the regular contact, I want to look at Commissioner Tahoe, because that was what we had actually inside the regulatory, correct?
That's correct. And daily interaction and daily contact or daily with students is going to be something that's both in our guidance, and it's student engagement is also addressed in our definition of unit of study for the 180 minutes. So what we're saying in our guidance is that there really needs to be a daily attendance taking with the teacher, if in the elementary grades of the actual teacher of the student, or in the high school grades of a homeroom teacher or someone else that will be an advisory teacher that will contact the student to make sure they're connecting. So that's a great point, Regent Wills. And on your issue of the 4 professional development days and increasing those to 6, because I do agree that more professional development is going to be needed in light of the emerging issues with trying to learn digital technology and how to engage in a new model. This is something that would require a legislative change for the 180 days. So that's something that we will be looking at as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Regent Reyes? Regent Reyes, you have to unmute, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to also mention, as did Regent Young, the youth participation, but also parent, community-based organizations, and many advocates and providers from early childhood, bilingual, across the gamut. We ensured that everyone was included in the discussion. 2 points. Number one, there are 4 R's: recover, rebuild, and renew, and reopen, and in our title. And I would suggest that there's a need for some clarity about a 5th R, which is not there, and that's resources. In looking at the materials from both task force reports and guidance materials for reopening, it is clear that in a number of places, resources are necessary and are not givens that can be taken for granted. And so I'm wondering if anyone in the State Education Department has looked at the possibility of some type of basic resource list that summarizes or tries to get at what would be some basic amount of funds that are needed to cover the needs in all of these different areas, including the area that had to do with washing of hands, cleaning gloves each time that you perform a temperature check on more than one student, child in the school. And so I would suggest that that 5th R is not something that we control. I understand that, but that there needs to be some guidance given to the legislature and the governor in terms of the resource needs for us to be able to support schools, school districts, charter schools in meeting our 4 R's. And my second point, a brief, had to do with language. It is stated that the language at the home, that material should be translated. And as I was told by staff, that the job of doing those translations is up to the district, which is another resource issue. But I'm wondering, in some districts in New York City and in other school districts throughout the state, there are many languages, and it's not clear that how we're going to be able to translate these documents, guidance documents, as well as other resources that parents need to be able to read in order so that they know what their role is and the expectation for the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Tillis? Regent Tillis, you have to unmute, please.
I just want to note that I am looking for some response.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll wait.
Is there a staff member that wants to speak to that before Regent Tillis?
Regent Reyes, this is Phyllis Morris. Hi, I can respond. We certainly are going to be advocating for the resources that the districts need. You're absolutely right. There are costs associated with all of these expectations. And I mean, it's a difficult fiscal environment right now, so I can envision this is going to be a challenge. But we certainly, it's not going to stop us from advocating for the needs that the school districts will have in meeting these expectations. On the translation topic, we would need additional funding. We did have a request in our Regents package last year for additional funds for translations. at the state level so that we can better support the needs of multilingual families. And that will be something we can reconsider again as we're putting together the region's budget and legislative priorities for the upcoming year. So thank you very much for your input.
And Regent Reyes, if I could just add something as well, I just wanted to also add that you're right, and the PPE is something it's very important that we have enough masks to, for all of our school districts in the state, and thermometers and things like that if screening's required. And so those are things that we've also raised the attention of the governor's office because those are going to be issues that we want to make sure that we have enough in the state for our schools if we are to move forward with in-person instruction. And so it's a resource issue. It's also an availability issue and making sure we have a sufficient amount when we're moving forward in September. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Regent Reyes.
Regent Reyes, this is Elisa Alvarez, and I would just want to add that in terms of the language question and concern that you shared, we do have at least about, last time I checked, about 200 languages, absolutely, in the state of New York. We currently have our New York State Arbor, our language Arbor, which is based in New York City, that does assist school districts to provide translations in a multiple array of languages. And so all school districts throughout the state of New York have access, especially in ensuring that parents receive communication as fast as possible.
I also want Jason Harmon to weigh in a little bit about the federal funds here.
Yeah, thank you. So Regent Reyes, one of the other pieces just to point to, so over the last several months, the teams that oversee our management of the federal dollars under ESSA, things like Title I, Title II, Title IV, those various program areas, we've processed more than 1,000 budget amendments as districts have looked to pivot in the use of their dollars to be able to make those resources available in the various directions, like you said. And then I think Regent Wills brought this up earlier in terms of the use of those dollars for professional development. But in addition, using those dollars for the purchase of devices, the use of those dollars for the purchase of PPE, it's again based on local needs, and that we will continue to work with districts to make sure that they are aware of the flexibilities within the uses of those federal dollars to accomplish some of those same ends, the social emotional pieces that Kathleen spoke about earlier, to make sure that districts are aware of the flexibilities that they have in terms of aligning those particular resources to the needs of their students, their teachers, and their families.
Thank you.
Regent Tillis?
Yeah. Are you aware in the last statement that we should maybe talk to the legislature about requiring them to give more flexibility on funding streams, so that we can purchase, school district can purchase more of those devices and then get reimbursed the year after. It's just one quick suggestion. To me, that the only way anything is going to work is if every kid has a device and there's access every place. I think this state should be the leader in calling for something like a moonshot. Access to the Wi-Fi should be the same as electric or water or any other basic for any household. And I think it's going to require a national effort, not a local level. And I think we should be recommending that. And I don't know how we can do it otherwise, because it adds everything else into equity. How can we have valid 3 through 8 testing if some students are doing packet deliveries and some students are doing very substantial face-to-face work because there are no devices or there's no access. To me, this all gets right together in the equity area. I might have missed a couple of things, but I just want to raise a couple of things. If I didn't, just ignore me. The certification, we talked about substitute teachers having more flexibility to be able to teach other courses. But what about the requirement that 20% can be out of certification and move that up a little bit because we're going to have more flexibility, I would think, in having a better, more teaching staff available. That's one subject. The second would be, what are we doing for a PD, in essence, for parents? Because I think they need it as much as anybody else. I think we should perhaps ban packet learning if we can force districts into doing some kind of basic learning besides the packet learning. We talked about under teaching and learning. I noticed that there was flexibility for physical education, but I didn't see flexibility for art and music and the arts in general. And I think that's one area that we should include as much as physical education, that there are certain things in the arts area that really need a different kind of flexibility. And basically, the money is the issue, and I don't know how we can't do it, but we can certainly recommend, and even the governor really has a problem doing it unless there's federal money. So those are the issues I have. Anybody want to respond to them?
I'm going to have Laura respond to the issue of certification, because we did go over that, so she can just re-emphasize that.
Kim, I can do it. The certification issues.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you got it, Laura?
Go ahead, Shannon. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I was going to say, so Regent Tillis, you had mentioned that there was a 20% of, you thought that there was a 20% rule for substitute teaching?
No, not for substitute, for out of certification teaching in general.
Yes, so for out of certification, an individual teacher can teach up to 5 classroom hours a week out of their certificate title. So that is something that is a proposal later this afternoon in terms of bumping that from 5 classroom hours a week to 10 classroom hours a week, which would be 1 to 2 periods.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the incidental teaching, yes.
Yeah, Regent Tillis, you raised a lot of important issues. One thing that we've heard a lot from people around the state, you mentioned it, are the reserve funds, like allowing additional flexibility at the state level and allowing either a lift on the cap for reserve funds or more ways that they can use unexpended reserve funds. We've heard issues regarding the smart bonds and the expansion of our smart bond approval. And we're looking at that. They just recently approved our big city school districts, and some of our other plans are about to put those before the Smart Bonds Review Board. So hopefully those plans will be approved shortly for devices. Additional state flexibility around some of our state grant programs and stuff would also be helpful. So we would agree with you, and we're looking into the legislature and the governor to help out with some of those things as well. With respect to your digital issues and the issues you expressed, that is one of the biggest issues I see coming up into this next school year is the digital divide. I think, as Shannon Logan expressed earlier, one of the things that we're requiring in our guidance is we're saying, take a look at your needs and what your students need in each and every school district across the state. Do an inventory and assessment of what devices you have, what students need devices, look at the availability of technology and Wi-Fi and hotspots. Make those, and to the extent practicable, we're requesting that districts make technology and hotspots available for their students. So we are saying, to the extent that you can, look at your inventory and provide those resources. We have, like as Jason expressed, there's some flexibility around our federal funds that might be used for those purposes. So we're asking districts to really take a look at their federal and state monies and see where those monies can be spent to help address that issue. As Laura mentioned, we're also expanding our incidental teaching regs and our substitute teaching regs. Those are 2 proposals for that I'll be bringing to you later on today for adoption by the Board of Regents to expand and allow additional flexibility around certification. Because you're right, we've heard a lot about that around the state, and I do think during this crisis, we may have A and B days or hybrid remote scheduling or blended models that might require more teachers in the classroom. And so we're going to need, teachers are going to need help. And so I think that this is a time where we really need to look at those flexibilities and where we can, use those during this crisis. So those are 2 proposals that we'll be bringing to you later. So thank you.
Also, I wanted Mary Beth to address the art and music, Regent Tillis.
Please.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, Regent Tillis. The flexibility for the delivery of arts programs is built into our unit of study flexibility for all programs. So our arts teachers will have um, the, the ability to examine the design of their courses and arrange their curriculum in ways that will meet the needs of the students in a particular environment, be it remote, hybrid, or in person. We also have a really well done set of considerations in the guidance around the arts, around the delivery of different arts, and what teachers should be thinking about in order to keep their children healthy and safe. So I think that we have addressed it, but we are certainly, this is, as Kim had said before, the first iteration of our guidance. And if we find that arts teachers need other special provisions, we will certainly be listening for that.
Yeah, I was also suggesting that the arts can be a very important part of social emotional learning when kids come back to school, because I know we're going to be having an emphasis on that as at the beginning of the school year, as kids come back, no matter what kind of program it is, hybrid or at home or in school. The arts really offer that opportunity to not only get content, but to also deal with social emotional needs.
100% agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Tillis. Regent Norwood? And Regent Norwood, if you would unmute, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. And I will try and be brief and just simply outline areas of concern or question, not looking for a response. Hopefully they will be engaged later in the course of the day. And in the spirit of transparency, if they are not, then I would forward them over via the board secretary. But for the record, very much concerned about the capacity of our facilities planning office to really be able to manage fire building code reviews without backlog or the office crashing. Secondly, just trying to figure out in my head how lockdown drills can occur with social distancing and still be meaningful for a very, very unforeseeable and hopefully non-occurring tragedy. I'd really like to know more about support for districts to engage with and coordinate with their local departments of social services. Would really like to know how we as a department are going to review district plans with a focus on instruction to and for families on using technology. Very much also concerned about the remote learning needs for students with special needs and how those services will be provided if it's not in a school, not in a residential facility, and not run afoul of our regulatory framework for professionals who engage with those students. And as Regent Tillis just shared, very much aware of the past conversations that we have had about the substitute teacher shortage, the certified teacher shortage, how that is not borne equally across districts in the state, and how in an even tighter labor market, we're going to try and meet that challenge. I would, before closing, just simply add my voice to that of my colleagues in really saluting you, Vice Chancellor and Chancellor, as well as Shannon and the leadership team on an incredible process. It was a daunting task to accomplish, but it was well accomplished, and the diversity and the amount of engagement is a testimony to the spirit of building together that we have tried to bring to this work. Thank you, Vice Chancellor.
Thank you, Regent Norwood. Regent Norwood, you raised a number of important points, and I know that staff will continue to work on those. I don't know if anyone from staff wants to speak to any one of the particular concerns, or shall we move on to Regent Mittler?
Vice Chancellor, we wrote everything down and we will get right back to Regent Norwood as soon as possible.
Okay, very good. And I will say that again, the full guidance will be disseminated on Wednesday, and everyone will have a greater chance to digest what's in that. And many of the concerns and questions raised here today will be addressed. All right, Regent Mittler.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Wilkins in her prompt response to my rather lengthy inquiries. Got an answer within a day. Amazing. So thank you very much. I just have a few issues. Many of the things were already mentioned. I have a concern about the McKinney-Vento homeless kids. I don't know how they get or can safely keep their iPads or computers, because many of them are in shelters and they're only there a day or two and then they're moving around. You know, these are things that are valuable commodities that can get stolen. Kids may or may not know how to use them. I saw on one of the websites a kid sitting outside the window of a Kentucky Fried Chicken because there was free Wi-Fi. I would like to know what we can do so the kids don't have to sit on a sidewalk to get their work done. This is a tough one because the children are mobile and the parents are having a terrible time. So I think that we just have to give a little more time and attention to the homeless kids or those who are constantly being shifted. I want to be sure that when we look at the bus and transportation, I noted that it was siblings sitting together, but I think it's anybody from the same stop or the same household. We've got a lot of foster children, grandparents taking kids and so on. And so I'd like to be sure that we're real clear when we talk about who can be near each other and what, that we include anybody from the same living residence, so same apartment. We could look at the language. I don't know what we're going to do about parents who opt out or keep changing their mind. So what are we going to do for the kids who go to school for 2 days and then mom says, I don't think this is safe, keeps you home 2 days, then sends you back. This is a lot of pressure on the teachers. So I'm not sure what or how that's going to be handled, but teachers are going to need some assistance in knowing how to put packets together or get it to the kids. It's a lot of extra work, or whether there will be an online distance learning position. So if you're in second grade, this is your Zoom address. You go to it and you will find second grade instruction or physics instruction or whatever. We're making an assumption for ELL that the parents are literate. So you can put all this in writing, but some of them really don't read and write. So some kind of verbal capacity to me would be good. And I'm concerned about home supplies. We assume that all kids have paper and pencil, but that's not true. So are we going to provide all the kids with a box of crayons and a wad of paper or something so that they have what they need in order to perform their skills? And this is a biggie, because if we're going to do some remote learning or engagement where kids have to work on their own, because we're not going to have the capacity for all kids to be in school, how do we make sure there's an easy place for them to access the necessary materials they need? And last but not least, for those of us who are not really technologically savvy, we keep saying access to a portal, but we have not said where the portal is. How do you get there? And if you're a parent or somebody who doesn't know about NICED website or how to get to a school website, those instructions need to be done. And I can't tell you to go online and look at it if you don't know where to go. So I don't know whether we pre-print a URL address or whether we have an access place for people or some kind of IT, so that those who really are technologically ignorant will have an opportunity. Most kids have gotten this in school, but we have a lot of changeover. So it's just something that we could give them a reference point. And thanks for all the hard work and all the changes. I think this is an extraordinary document.
Thank you, Regent Mittler. You raised a number of good points. I don't know that there was any particular question that you were looking to have having answered now. So I'm sure that staff noted your concerns and your points that were made. Thank you. Regent Cottrell.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chancellor. I wanted to say this is an incredible effort and report, and to thank Dr. Wilkins and the SED staff for spearheading this, and especially our chancellor, who personally was involved in coordinating all these efforts. The health and safety aspects of the plan are excellent, and there are alternatives in different recommendations like temperature taking and things like that that allow us not to have to use a separate thermometer for each student. So there are all kinds of alternatives involved. The references to the CDC and other sources are complete, and I think something we should all try to look at and learn so that we can give advice to the field. So thank you very much for this effort.
Thank you, Doctor. Regent Young.
Thank you. Just a couple of points, and these don't require answers, but this is the last meeting of this school year. And it just occurred to me that as we're talking about these things, several of my colleagues brought up the issue of funding and investments. And it just seems to me that going forward, we should be perhaps, as we think about 21, 22, when we return, we should be thinking about different types of funding formula strategies to support young people more comprehensively. And the reason why I raised this, we're in an unprecedented time. What has occurred since March 15th has changed lives all across the state. And I can only recall the only other time that something like that happened was in New York City right after 9/11. And the only way to address what occurred, there were new funding formula strategies established that were temporary, but they address very unique needs that came up. And it just seems to me that we have a number of budget committees that we ought to be thinking about what are some new and different funding formulas that would address some of the things that we're talking about. The other point that I would make is that we use the word equity throughout, and one of the things that we know is that the pandemic has impacted different demographics in different communities very differently. And so again, when we think about these funding formulas, that should be included. The other that has come up, and I know Regent Tillis spoke to it, and someone else mentioned it, is the whole issue of parents. It seems to me that what's needed now is more than just guidance for parents. I think we have a family and community engagement office. So it seems to me we ought to have a family plan or a parent plan that is very specific about, number one, what do we actually expect parents to do in this moment? And what kind of guidance do we offer parents that have limited resources? So I would just think that as we go forward, we ought to be thinking about a parent plan. The final point that I would make is this, and Commissioner, you may have already addressed this in the regulation, but there is a difference between teachers taking attendance and instructional contact. And so I would just underscore that when Regent Wills talked about student contact, and when I mentioned student contact, I was really talking about instructional contact with teachers on a daily basis. And I think that's what the youth were talking about as well. So that may be included in the regulation, but if it isn't included, I think we need to make sure that what young people are saying is that they need more than just someone taking their attendance and calling them up saying, how are you doing? They actually need instruction, right? There's no substitute for that contact with the teacher. And so somehow we need to make sure that that's included in our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Young.
Regent Young's last point, we did actually, you're so right, Regent Young, and this is something that we thought about very carefully, actually, Kim and Mary Beth and I, and those were the amendments that were actually revised last night for the board, is because we thought through the definition of unit of study and what those 180 minutes of instructional time should look like. And we actually have amended the reg, and revised the item, as you saw this morning, to really focus in on it, and sent a revised item last night. So thank you for mentioning that. That is something that we really think needs to be thought through as this next academic year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for 3 more questions or points to be made. Regent Chin.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Just to piggyback on what Regent Young spoke about was the daily attendance. And I do know that schools are responsible for collecting and reporting daily attendance. I'm wondering if the state has a handle on the daily attendance. What was the average for school districts across the state? Just kind of in some way surface where there may be greater needs. The other one is also about chronic absenteeism. I know that schools are being asked to address that issue, but what I'm concerned about is that there are these kids that are not attending classes at all, either, well, it's definitely not in person, but online. And so my concern really is about how we are able to address that issue and what support we can give to the schools and districts to identify who these kids are. These are the ones that I'm most concerned about because they're lost in the system. And the repercussions, the implications are tremendous for these students. So I don't need an answer right now, but it's something that I think we need to address, and that schools and districts need to identify who these kids are. Because I understand that even in summer attendance, it's quite low, and these are the same students that did not attend during the regular school year and are not attending during summer school as well. The other issue that I wanted to bring up was Regent Tillis had mentioned earlier. I'm hearing from the field that schools are losing thousands and thousands of dollars in their budget compared to last year. And in some cases, it's more than even $500,000. I know that we can't all of a sudden create monies for these schools, but I think that moving forward, that we need to keep an open mind about being more flexible and allowing schools and districts to do whatever they need to address the shortage of funds moving forward into the next school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Chin. Regent Collins, please unmute.
Yes, someone please give me some insight into how we're dealing with the nursing, the school nurses, because they're the only ones, the only hands-on person that's in the schools. Some of them may be using telenursing like they're using telemedicine. But when you have one nurse in a district, did we address that at all? Because that was part of the discussion during the health and safety sessions that I attended. So have we addressed that in our plan?
I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Cataldo, Regent Collins, to address that.
Okay, thank you.
So Regent Collins, we do try to address schools that don't have school nurses, recognizing that we don't currently require every school to have a school nurse. So we built flexibilities in our guidance to schools, saying, if you don't have a school nurse when a child is identified as being symptomatic, what steps they have to take. And, those kids have to immediately go home rather than being able to go to the school nurse's office. But it is a concern, and I agree completely. We did hear it over and over that schools are really concerned that even when they have a single school nurse, that they're going to be overburdened, because if they're dealing with children coming into the office with, bumps and bruises, and also have responsibility for students who may be positive for COVID, they can't, cut themselves in half and deal with both those children. So it is a big impact on our school nurses. We tried to provide as comprehensive guidance as possible, but it's an issue that I think it's going to be difficult for districts to deal with. So thank you.
And Regent Collins, I just want to also add it from perspective of a building principal or superintendent. We're going to have some kind of backup system because school nurses get sick as well. So you're going to have to make sure you cannot.
That's correct.
School nurse. So that's something else that we're going to have to continue to work with. So we're there. We're there.
That's where I think the district should be proactive and make sure that they have some on-call school nurses or those who may be retired, who will be willing to come in and even just do the telemedicine portion of it. And some districts are lucky enough to have a medical director.
Right.
Thank you, because that was a concern of the nurses and those who were in my workshops. And I wanted to make sure that we did give some guidance to them. Thanks so much. And also, I have a blanket thank you to everyone because so many people have been involved in this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Collins. Regent Willis, please unmute. Thank you.
I am also extremely grateful because every question that we sent to Kim and to the Chancellor and to Commissioner, every question is answered. I have the sense of this enormous undertaking and how much effort has gone into this from the state side, but also in every district. There is going to be an enormous undertaking here to manage and to implement what we have in mind. There are certain issues that I know we can't do much about, and yet I feel they're essential to this process of returning. And one of those is the childcare issues for teachers and for parents if we go to these hybrid programs. I know that this is almost impossible for us to manage, but if there could be some way that we could connect with parents and connect with childcare services so that we support parents in this effort in some way, and teachers as well, who in a hybrid situation are going to find this matter to be almost intractable. So that's one issue I have. The other issue is simply connecting with parents regularly to find out how it's going for them, how the process that we're using at the district level is actually working for the parents. And are there some tweaks we can make? Are there some changes we can make so that we're responsive to the parents? And it's just an enormous task, and I congratulate all of you involved for the effort that has gone in and the result in this document, which is so detailed. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I want to again thank staff for all of its hard work that went into this, and I want to thank the regions for the diligence in reviewing this guidance and helping us get it into shape. It will be shared widely on Wednesday, but as was said earlier, this will continue to be a work in progress. We have no doubt that additional issues and problems will arise and this field will require guidance, and we'll continue to provide that guidance. Now I want to move on to higher ed.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor.
Yes, hi, good morning. Thank you, Chancellor and Vice Chancellor, Board. I will start off and then turn it over to Bill Murphy. So much like P12, Chancellor Betty Rosa and the Board of Regents and Interim Commissioner Shannon Tahoe held a series of meetings. We had 4 meetings that provided a real opportunity for members of the board and the department staff to engage the higher ed community regarding their plans to reopen in the fall. It was attended by many faculty, college administrators, students, and other interested parties from every region of the state. A lot of the discussion and the focus was on health, safety, educational quality, and equity. Much like P12, exactly like P12, our goal was the same, which was to provide the department and the Board of Regents with thoughtful and inclusive input that would help us to develop policies and regulatory changes to support our colleges and universities as they plan for this fall. This provides a general summary of the number of participants and the number of colleges that were represented by those participants. We had a very good turnout, even though we had a very short window of opportunity. You can see about 892, approximately 892 individuals participated from 171 colleges throughout the various regions of the state. Again, like P12, we had 5 particular areas of focus: health and safety for students, faculty, and administrators at colleges, academic, student support services and financial aid, opportunity programs. We talked about clinical experiences for educator preparation programs, as well as clinical experiences for professional licensure programs. Again, like P12, and a lot of coordination with P12 and Kim Wilkins' office. We had very similar guiding questions, the challenges that institutions face with reopening. We asked them to provide examples of creative solutions to those problems, and how can the regents and the department help address institutional or regulatory issues that stand in the way of their success. In order to gather input, we had a number of vehicles to use. Obviously, through conversation, senior staff were all involved in the breakout sessions that I just mentioned. We had much like P12, the Region 2 Comprehensive Center led by Sarah Breezy and Wested hosted the Zoom meetings. We also had help from New York State Department of Health staff, who were certainly a valuable resource, and they also attended some of the health and safety breakout session. We found that participants were engaged in the conversation, and we had some good back and forth, and certainly also captured any notes that were typed into the chat. We also use something called the Thought Exchange, which is an online software tool. And the Thought Exchange is something that allows individuals to log onto the site and type in their thoughts and comments, and also allows individuals to look at those thoughts and comments and express how they feel those thoughts and comments reflect their own concerns or thoughts. So as they rate them, we can find how many people are focused on a particular topical issue. And that Thought Exchange remains open and will remain open until July 16th. And want to give a thank you to Capital Region BOCES, who supports that Thought Exchange online tool. It's very helpful, and we've had over 200 individuals so far engage in that Thought Exchange. Overall, what we general takeaways, first priority is the safety of students, faculty, and staff. Certainly, New York's higher ed community has suffered tragic human loss. Participants reminded us of the emotional impact this continues to have on students and their families, faculty, and staff as a result of the pandemic. There were also major concerns about the economic impact of COVID on higher education. Many institutions continue to struggle financially. And a big takeaway again, state ed must continue to be flexible in its regulatory oversight. These are certainly unprecedented times, and we need to respond quickly and creatively wherever we can. And now I'd like to turn it over to Bill Murphy, our Deputy for Higher Ed, who will go into a little bit more detail about each of the breakout sessions. So with that, Bill, please.
Thank you, John. So yes, we recognized early on in our breakout sessions that health and safety for the entire academic campus community was the paramount issue and concern. New York college community has suffered tragic human loss in this pandemic, and participants right away wanted to remind us of the emotional and social impact that this has had and continues to have on the students, faculty, and staff. Just to set the context for health and safety requirements and protocol, colleges are required to follow New York State Department of Health guidance related to 4 major criteria: reopening plans, monitoring, containment, and shutdown plans in case issues start to arise on campuses or geographic regions. All colleges must develop plans, with private institutions submitting those to the New York State Department of Health, and the public colleges sending their respective plans to the system administration at either SUNY or CUNY. Most colleges are already well underway with planning. However, we are seeing some differences in response depending on the size or administrative capacity and resources for different institutions of higher education. So for example, colleges have unique approaches to orientation and welcome for students and staff, including communication strategies and platforms, testing policies and protocols, and distribution of PPE, for example. At least one institution plans to require a 1-credit course on COVID as part of the orientation. We also heard some creative use of space in outdoor areas. For example, setting up tents or food trucks, outdoor internet connected workspace and charging stations, creative use of work study to allow for training some students as ambassadors to help explain guidelines and distribute masks or PPE. And one area that came up a lot was the area of trying to build partnerships with the nearby hospitals to ensure access to testing and healthcare, and the challenges related to developing relationships with local health departments. So for example, some areas have access to a very extensive network of healthcare and ambulatory places for testing, and others, say in more rural areas, excuse me, mentioned that they have challenges just getting to a certain testing site that could be miles and miles away. And last, what came up in many different breakout sessions was they were asking for metrics to know when a college should shut down. For example, after a certain number of cases on campus. And we recognize that this is up to DOH and the governor's office to decide. So we made sure to communicate this feedback to the governor's office. So next, academic, student support services, and financial aid. Right away, we noticed that one of the most important flexibilities that colleges were seeking when this first started back in March was the flexibility to offer online or hybrid courses. And at that time, we provided flexibility, very broad flexibility, and we extended it to the summer and upcoming fall semester. So colleges are now asking us to consider extending this for the entire academic year. And this ties back to the planning and being able to get ahead of a lot of the issues related to making sure that they have options. And it's not just, they wanted to stress, and I also wanted to stress what we've been seeing. This is not just to make sure that you can entirely roll out your whole academic portfolio as online. It is meant to allow them to have different options for hybrid, for on-campus. You could even have students on campus that are going back and forth between online courses, hybrid, and going to courses in classrooms that have certain distance regulations. So it's an area that we've got to consider and offer guidance on whether it's going to be extended beyond the fall. To date, we've tried to stay a bit in lockstep with this issue with the federal government's policy, because it does tie. It also relates to Title IV financial aid federally. So we're keeping an eye on that as well. Also a major issue, and you probably have heard this, colleges are now trying to figure out alternative semester formats. One of the most popular that we've been seeing is they're going to bring students onto campus. Many of the colleges are going to bring students onto campus, maybe sometimes even a little earlier than expected. And then by the Thanksgiving break, they're going to tell the students to not report back to campus and they'll, in many cases, be doing some doing online learning in those scenarios. So we've had to basically say to ourselves, what is it that we can provide them for flexibility? And you'll notice one of the items on the regulatory flexibilities for this month is to allow for a semester that may be a little bit shorter in weeks for the entire academic year coming up. It's still going to require them to, follow the credit hour requirements and semester hour definitions, but it does provide them some flexibility for weeks. And also, while colleges have implemented various combinations of online, hybrid, and on-campus learning formats, as we talked about in the P12 discussion, there's still digital divide issues. For example, cost of internet access and technology can be prohibitive. Students may have to share bandwidth and devices with others in the household. Students may only have a tablet or even a smartphone, which is much more difficult in many cases when you're trying to do research and do courses online with, when you need a PC or laptop. We also heard about the unique challenges for students with disabilities. This is an issue that it was already a challenge to ensure that students with disabilities had the resources and supports on campus. And you can imagine in remote learning environments, it's become even more difficult. Our opportunity programs, we had outstanding participation from our opportunity program students in a range of programs, notably